Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to do the opening statement, and then I'll announce my colleagues and kind of guide this conversation, and then kick it over to the panel. I really wanted the advocates to go first and kind of reverse order, but I know Sanal has a time crunch. So if it's okay, if Sanal has something to say, that's great. And then I really wanted the advocates to kind of say their statement. Then administration falls immediately afterwards, kind of hear what the thoughts are about what the updates are suggested, and then we go into questions from counselors. So let's go. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm City Councilor Lydia Edwards, Chair of the Committee on Government Ops. It's Thursday, March 3rd, 2021, and we're here today for a virtual hearing on Docket 0239, order regarding a text amendment for Boston Zoning Code relative to affordable housing and jobs training exactions. This matter is sponsored by myself and was referred to the committee on January 27th. In accordance with Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 executive order, we're having this conversation, this hearing on Zoom. This allows us to balance the public safety concerns of today, but allows for us to do our job. The public may watch this meeting via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-tv. It will also be rebroadcast at a later date on Xfinity 8 RCN 82 and FiOS 964. For public testimony, written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made a part of the record and available to all counselors. A quick summary of the docket as filed. It adds edits and definitions to the Boston Zoning Code relative to inclusionary development and linkage fees, and it's consistent with the home rule petition that's passed by the City Council and was approved this year as it was passed by and signed by the governor. And in short, I'm getting right to it, if you will. We've got this new power to have an in-house family conversation about development and exactions that we otherwise would have had to go to the State House for. And so we had a celebration, and we're so grateful for the fact that we can have these conversations and really get to the back and forth here in Boston for the Boston folks' benefit. So that's one thing. And so the suggested amendments or suggested moments in this particular ordinance, I just quickly summarize, is to codify the CPI increases to make sure that they're part of the regular amounts that we step up every year. 2 is to make sure that as PDAs are amended, so if a PDA is approved under a certain linkage, as it's amended, as many PDAs are, that the whatever happens after the amendment, when that amendment becomes effective, that new linkage becomes what the developer has to apply or use. And essentially, it did have conversation about IDP in that. And I'm just letting folks know IDP, which is our inclusionary development policy, we are having a separate hearing on that. So we're going to take all discourse around IDP a little out of this today. And we'll be discussing that 13% and the 70% AMI at a separate hearing, because IDP is now part of our zoning code. If we want to make amendments and do something with it, we should first talk with the community, hear what they want to hear, discuss that in a separate hearing, and then we'll bring that back. So I just want to kind of remove that. Other things that I think are going to come up today, and I'm excited to have a discussion about, is while, and I'll thank you, Mayor Walsh, for increasing the the linkage recently. I think for many of us, that really brought us up to what we should have been anyway. So the increase wasn't in terms of really bringing us forward or bringing us more, it was bringing us to level. That's one thing. Number 2, I think that there's a real question about whether an amendment should be a trigger for making sure the updated linkage should come through, or whether buildings, and as buildings are coming up, should be a question of whether the linkage should be updated. I think that process and study need to be also codified. What I don't want is for a study to be the defense of progress. And by that, I mean, we're still studying. And I want to know that when we are going to study an increase or decrease or whatever we're doing, that there's a timeline around that, to be very frank. because there was a Nexus study, I think, commissioned by the city in 2016, and we didn't really get the results for some time, which resulted in actually a higher increase, or recommended a higher increase. So we just want to make sure there's a codified, streamlined understanding of that study. And so those are kind of my initial thoughts. This is basically our attempt to continue to upgrade and change what our linkage is. I'm being very, very honest about it. I'm looking at an increase because I feel we're finally level funded, but I think we need to also increase. We need more. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues in order of their arrivals for some brief remarks. Then we will go to Sanal and then the advocates, and then go back for a round with my colleagues. So here for, excuse me, let me announce who's here. We have Councillor Flynn, Councillor Sabi George, Councillor Braden, Councillor Baker, Councillor Mejia, and Councillor Campbell. Our panelists today include Sanal Gandhi, Deputy Chief of Staff of the BPDA, Tim Davis, Deputy Director at DND, Ryan Glasscock, Deputy Director for Regulatory Planning and Zoning at BPDA, Michelle McCarthy, Housing Policy Manager, BPDA, and Lizzie Torres, Housing Policy Assistant, BPDA. We also have Joe Kreisberg from Massachusetts Community Development Corporations, Hillary Pizer, Associate Executive Director of the Massachusetts Affordable Housing Alliance, also known as MAHA, Amy Nisham from the Jobs Training Alliance, Samantha Montano from Jamaica Plain Neighborhood Development Corporation, and Brian Doherty might be joining us. I don't know if he's here yet, but his name is listed on behalf of the Building Trades Coalition. So that being said, my colleague, very brief opening remarks so we can get to working on linkage. In order of arrival, we have Councillor Flynn.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Edwards, for your leadership, to Mayor Walsh's team and the D&D team, Sheila Dillon. Thank you. It's critical that we provide more funding for affordable housing and job training. I'm here to listen. I do support this text amendment. And again, want to say thank you to the advocates as well for their advocacy and making sure that Boston is a city for everybody, but especially for low-income residents, our seniors, and workers looking for a decent job with training options and a good place to live, affordable housing. Thank you, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Sabi George.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just thinking about and recognizing the time and the important testimony offered by everyone here today, I look forward to hearing. That is it from me. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am delighted to be here to hear about how we linkage and all things related to affordable housing and job training. So I look forward to hearing the discussion, and I will have questions later. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to thank everybody for their time and just here to be part of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mejia. Councillor Mejia? We'll circle back to Councillor Mejia. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards, for your leadership, and thank you to everyone for being here. Looking forward to the conversation, obviously critically important to the housing issues. But I also want to thank you, Councillor Edwards, for always creating a space where we can all work together on these issues and not have that us versus them, or which can sometimes happen in the housing conversation. So thank you so much for this important conversation. Of course, thank you to all of the panelists.
Thank you. So as stated, we're going to go have Sanal go first, and then we're going to go to Joe. And it looks like it's Joe, Amy, Samantha, who are here from the advocates, and we'll go through with the rest of the administration. So Sanal.
Thank you so much, Councillor Edwards, and thank you so much to everyone here today. I know Tim had a couple of words. Tim, do you want to go before me, or do you want to?
Yeah.
Do you want me to?
Thank you, Sonal. Just kind of to introduce everyone, Chairperson Edwards, Councillors Flynn, Sabi George, Braden, Baker, Mejia, and Campbell. I'm so grateful you're all here today, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. For the record, I'm Tim Davis, Deputy Director for Policy Development and Research at the Department of Neighborhood Development. I am joined here today by our partners at the Boston Planning and Development Agency, including Brian Glasscock, Deputy Director for Regulatory Planning and Zoning, Sonal Gandhi, Deputy Chief of Staff, and also just to make sure you're all kind of aware of who the housing go-to people at BPDA are now, introducing Michelle McCarthy, Housing Policy Manager, and Lizzie Torres, who's our Housing Policy Assistant. On behalf of the Walsh administration, we are enormously pleased that the State House passed the IDP linkage home rule petition. It is a significant win for us in terms of local control and home rule, in that it allows us the flexibility to change what we can require of large commercial developments to pay as linkage fees to support the creation and preservation of income-restricted housing and for workforce development programs. It also allows the City of Boston for the first time to codify our 20-year-old inclusionary development policy into zoning, allowing us to capture important affordable housing benefits regardless of zoning variances. This helps us to preserve the policy while also updating our zoning, whether it be citywide or neighborhood by neighborhood. Knowing that this hearing is now going to be focused specifically on linkage only, we did have some remarks from Brian Glasscock, which we're going to put on hold for now. We'll probably use that in our hearing on the 30th, but I will be turning it over to Sonal now for her statement about the linkage program. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tim. I want to join everyone here in expressing our extreme excitement and delight at the passage of the home rule petition that allows us to have more resources for affordable housing and job training. We are so thrilled and we're so thankful to Councillor Edwards for her leadership, for all the advocates for their incredible support and all the work that I know that they've done. And we're completely and absolutely thrilled that we are here today. I know we're all amongst friends here. Everyone here is very familiar with the linkage program, but just for those in the audience that may not be familiar with it, I'll just give a very, very quick brief overview, and then I'll talk a little bit about some of the points that Councillor Edwards raised, and looking forward to a really, really fruitful and a healthy discussion. So as you know, Boston Linkage Program was created in 1986 to leverage funding for affordable housing and workforce training through payments by large-scale commercial real estate development. Large scale is any development over 100,000 square feet that is not housing would be paying into a linkage fund for jobs and housing. Interestingly enough, Boston is one of the only cities in the country that has jobs training. And since its inception in 1986, Linkage has generated more than $200 million for affordable housing and workforce training. The funds that are collected through Linkage are administered by the Neighborhood Housing Trust through the DND, and the Neighborhood Jobs Trust, the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development. Since 2014, the Linkage program has generated over $80 million to support affordable housing and job training from new development. And Linkage provides industry recognized job training to over 2,000 Boston residents annually. And the Neighborhood Jobs Trust has dedicated over $2.4 million to emergency support for workforce and education programs, as well as specialized job training for workers preparing to enter the IT, tech, and healthcare industries, especially since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Mayor Walsh thought it was important to take advantage of the new flexibility provided by the legislation. So on February 9th, Mayor Walsh announced a 42% increase in the linkage fees. The increased rate is $15.39 per square foot, of which $13 will be dedicated to affordable housing and $2.39 to workforce training. This was approved by the BPDA board on Thursday, February 11th, and we're expecting this to appear at the Boston Zoning Commission on March 10th. So this has not been heard at the Boston Zoning Commission yet, but this will apply to all projects that file PNS after February 18th. So this is basically in effect at this point for projects that are going to be submitting PNFs. This is up from $10.81 per square foot, and this was set in 2018. So our last increase was in 2018. And at that point, the linkage rates were $9.03 for affordable housing and $1.78 for workforce development. The new rate was determined based on several years of feasibility assessments and the current economic climate. We have a very robust research department, and we had feasibility assessments to look at. We, as Councillor Edwards pointed out, we took into account many different variables, and we took into account what linkage rates might have been if they'd increased by CPI every 3 years for jobs. And we also looked at the building cost index to ensure that the amount of affordable housing funded by linkage fees is not eroded over time by higher building costs and economic conditions. We believe that it continues to be critical that we leverage Boston's development market to maximize funding for affordable housing and workforce training while balancing the economic reality of COVID-19. Setting exaction rates is a matter of balancing public policy goals and considering both the need to address increased demand for affordable housing and workforce development services with the potential impacts of an increased rate on the city's future development, commercial rents, and competitiveness in attracting and retaining businesses and continued investment. Finding affordable housing in Boston, as we all know, continues to be challenging for low and moderate income employees employed in new commercial developments. Average monthly rent for an apartment in Boston rose to $24.07 in 2020, and preparing Boston residents to fill the jobs created by new commercial development will continue to require city investments in skills training, English for speakers of another language, and adult basic education services. The opportunity to increase linkage exactions to meet these pressing challenges comes at a time when the commercial real estate market faces uncertainty brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. As the pandemic has kept office workers at home and customers away from restaurants and retail businesses, demand for commercial space has fallen. The overall office vacancy rate in Boston has risen from 6.7% at the beginning of March 2020 to 9% at the end of January 2021. While commercial rental rates have not yet fallen substantially, CoStar projects that vacancies will continue to rise and that office rents will fall during 2021. Given current economic uncertainties, many companies are deferring long-term decisions, while others are looking to sublease the office space that they're not currently using. As businesses have looked to shrink their office footprint, the amount of office space currently available for sublease has risen to 3.4 million square feet as of the fourth quarter of 2020. This is up from 1.3 million square feet prior to the onset of the pandemic, and that represents the largest amount of available sublease space observed in data going back to 2000. Of note, even amidst turmoil in the economy, approvals of commercial projects by the BPDA remained robust in 2020, primarily due to very large projects in East Boston. The BPDA approved 4.2 million square feet of commercial development in 2020. This was up from 3.1 million in the prior year, though below the historically strong numbers of 2017, which was 4.4 million square feet, and 2018 was 4.8 million square feet. The BPDA also approved 1.1 million square feet of institutional development in 2020, up from 600,000 square feet in 2019. Strong approvals signal optimism that Boston's market will emerge from the current downturn, maintaining its advantage in knowledge sectors such as healthcare, higher education, tech, and finance. We are confident that the economy will bounce back, and continued growth in the city's life sciences sector is expected to feed demand for new lab and office space. A few details on the unemployment rate. I think that's important here. Boston's unemployment rate fell to 6.8% in November 2020 from a high of 18.9% in June of 2020. And at that point, that was the highest unemployment rate in the nation. Unfortunately, much of the recent decline in the rate is attributable to people moving from unemployment to out of the labor workforce, rather than back into employment. Unemployment rates were at 12.9% in August and 11% in September. So we're moving in the right direction, given that we reached historically unprecedented levels. For example, the Great Recession peak for Boston was 8.4%, and we were at 18.9% in June of last year. A few quick words on the Linkage Nexus study that was mentioned. In 2016, the BPDA did commission a study to review its exaction rates and policies in response to changes in the nature of the city's development and employment. housing market conditions, housing development costs, and a growing need for housing and living wage employment. The study found that fully financing the affordable housing impact of new development would require linkage fees well in excess of the then current rates, and also cautioned that such rates could not be sustained without Boston's office market losing competitiveness to regional and national peers. Taking this into account, the study recommended setting the housing exaction rates between $12.87 a square foot and $12.39 per square foot, and a job exaction rate of between $199 and $264 per square foot. Taking into account the concern that the adoption of the maximum recommended 2016 exaction rates could impair Boston's regional competitiveness in attracting businesses and making the city a less desirable location for real estate development, especially in light of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the continuing uncertainty in the real estate market, while fully recognizing the urgency of the need for additional resources for housing and job training, the BPDA recommended an increase to the combined exaction rate to $15.39 as mentioned, a 42% increase to the 2018 rate. By taking this step, we believe that we are prudently ensuring that responsible development continues to occur in Boston while continuing to address some of the most pressing needs of Bostonians. The BPDA and D&D are committed to future reviews of the linkage program following Boston's economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to hearing from all our colleagues and friends on this call today. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we turn it over to the advocates, we've been joined by Councillor Flaherty and Councillor Bach. And just wanted to note, one of the other things I forgot to mention to be discussed is the drawdown, or to draw down the threshold of which point linkage would apply. So we're at 100,000 square feet. Other things to come up is also, should we go lower than that? So I'm going to go directly to the advocates, and then for Councillor Flaherty and Councillor Box, just knowledge, we're going from advocates, we're going to go then back through the administration, and then we're going to turn it over to questions from colleagues. So Joe Kreisberg from MACDC.
Thank you, Chairwoman Edwards, and thank you, councilors, for taking the time to have this hearing on this important issue. My name is Joe Kreisberg. I'm a resident of the city of Boston and the executive director of the Massachusetts Association of Community Development Corporations. Our members, as many of you know, build and manage affordable housing, about 8,000 to 9,000 apartments across the city, as well as a number of affordable home ownership projects that we've developed over the years. And our members are also, some of them, involved in workforce development and job training programs. So we care very much about both aspects of this program. I want to thank the council for your leadership in getting this home rule petition through the legislature, and we're excited to be working with you to implement it. And we're very appreciative of the mayor and his team for immediately increasing the linkage fee so we can capture the value that's coming online in 2021. But we agree with you, Chairwoman, that that's not the end of the conversation. It should be the beginning of the conversation. And it was interesting to listen to Sonal's presentation. And Sonal, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to call MACDC's office landlord, because our lease expires in September and he wants a 40% increase. So maybe he hasn't been following the statistics as closely as you have. Hopefully he's listening today. A couple of things that I just wanted to say about the linkage program that I think are really important is that by having this resource, the city also gets more federal and state money. Because we have these local dollars, it helps our members and other affordable housing developers to leverage more state and federal money into the city. So the bang for the buck is increased beyond the dollar that you see on the linkage balance sheet. And secondly, the flexibility of the linkage dollars allows us to meet housing needs that some of the federal programs aren't very effective at. It allows us to serve more families, serve lower income levels, do more home ownership projects, and meet the full range of housing needs that our city has. So I also want to echo what the chairwoman said about the importance of balancing the need to do some analysis and research to come up with the right number, but also the urgency to act and not to allow the research to become an excuse not to act. One of the great things about the home rule petition is if we need to in the future, the city can adjust it downward or sideways or upwards. So we have some flexibility going forward. We don't have to go back to the legislature each time. So as the market evolves, we can respond accordingly. And I think notwithstanding the short-term challenges we have with COVID, there still seems to be strong interest in the development community. So I think there's opportunity to grow this program. And with that, I will thank you for the time and happy to take questions at the appropriate point.
Thank you. Hillary Pfizer from MAHA.
Hi, thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. MAHA has been really excited, like you are, to be having this conversation at this virtual City Hall and not at the State House. And we want to thank everybody who worked on that. I know there were a lot of counselors involved in pushing that, as well as community organizations. And I think what I want to emphasize today is that the formal name for linkage is a development impact fee. And you know, the Nexus study that was done in 2016, it did say that the full impact, what it would cost to mitigate the extra affordable housing demand that would be directly attributable to new commercial development, is $85.55. The study then assumes that the lion's share of that money will come from outside the city, and that, you know, the city share would be about a quarter of that. My reading of the study says that they looked at $24.03 and found that that would have an absolutely negligible impact on commercial rents, or if not on the rents, on the investor returns, and that linkage is a very, very, very small percentage of overall development cost. So my reading of the study is a little bit different than Sanal's. I think it says that we need vastly more linkage to offset the demand for affordable housing that goes along with commercial development, right? And we want commercial development, we want good jobs in the city, but we also have to have places for those folks who work there to live. And if we don't have places for them to live, then the higher income people who are coming to work in those buildings are going to displace our members and a lot of other good people across the city who are working their butts off. They have decent jobs, they have great credit. They cannot find a place to live in the city of Boston. So I think we have to look at a higher linkage fee if we're going to continue to permit millions and millions of square feet of office space. And, you know, when I look at the pipeline now, I see mostly life sciences. You know, we're dealing with a very large development, Dorchester-based city in Dorchester, that is 3/4 commercial. And the plan is not sort of traditional office space, but much more in the life sciences areas. There's a lot of development in Alston, I know. Life sciences, there's 2 million square feet called On the Dot, not far from us, in South Boston, again, life sciences. So I agree that how many of us are going to be full-time in our cubicles is not certain at this point, but we are getting many, many proposals for large-scale commercial development in other areas right now. And I do worry that if we don't have a plan for the low and moderate income workers who are going to come and want to work in those buildings, that we are going to exacerbate a really difficult problem. The other thing I would say is that if we institute linkage fees at a higher level going forward, that can be accounted for when developers are purchasing property. We are seeing in Dorchester a tremendous amount of speculation based on projected increases in density, so that the city itself, the BPDA itself, is in the process of creating tremendous real estate value in the city. A couple of examples that I can just cite off the top of my head are Dorchester Bay City. For one, UMass Boston bought the land where a lot of it's going to be built for $18.7 million in 2010. And 8 years later, they leased it for $235 million. 18.7 to $235 million in 8 years. There's another place on Dorchester Ave that Gerald Chan bought a few years ago for 17 million. It had been sold 4 years prior for 7 million. And again, his spokesperson cited that they know that Glover's Corner is under review for tremendous upzoning, creating a lot of real estate value there. So that some of that could be captured for affordable housing and job training. One, to make sure that those developments don't end up displacing our people. And two, to make sure that some of the people in the neighborhood are trained and ready to be able to do those jobs. So from where we sit, we're graduating almost 3,000 people this year from our homebuyer classes. 80% are people of color. Most of them are under 80% area median income. They cannot find a place to live in the city. We don't want commercial development to make it worse. We want the commercial development, but we need the affordable housing to go along with it. And our reading of what's been done to date in terms of very careful analysis and study is that the $24 that was cited in that study would not adversely impact development. Again, we are not against development. We do not want to stop development, but we want it to be responsible development, and we want to have a linkage fee that really speaks to the need that happens when you build a whole lot of commercial space. So thank you, and I hope to work with all of you. We're, again, really excited to be having this conversation at the city level.
Thank you. Amy Nisham, Jobs Training and Alliance.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards, and to the committee for allowing us to be here today to continue to talk about the need to improve and increase linkage fees in the city of Boston. I'm Amy Nishman. I'm the Senior Vice President at JVS, and I'm also the Vice President of the Job Training Alliance, a group of 24 nonprofit job training providers who advocate for low-income workers in the city. In order to not say the same things over and over again, I just want to +1 to everything that the advocates before me have already said. I also want to thank the mayor for what his administration just did to increase the linkage fees after we've been talking about this for so many years, and +1 to Councilor Edwards saying that's just the beginning and we need to do more. The increase will make a big impact on both affordable housing and job training programs in the city, but we believe we can do even more to improve the programs and ensure that it continues to ensure residents can stay and work in Boston. One critical change that we think must be made to the program is that developers should pay the linkage fee that's in effect at the time that they build their actual buildings, not when they pull their permits. Developers should not be able to lock in their linkage fee rates at a time when it could take possibly years for the building to actually be built. It just doesn't make sense, and it leaves city residents further and further behind as the development begins to happen and CPI increases. We already saw what happens with the linkage program when we fail to do increases over the years, and we want to be able to rectify that. Opponents of changes to the program may point to COVID and the economic downturn it has resulted in, arguing that developers can't pay anymore in the current climate. But it would be a mishap for me not to critically underscore that affordable housing and job training are needed now more than ever. Many of the industries in which we provide targeted job training have been severely impacted by COVID, and there are a lot of workers that need to be retrained, and this is the vehicle that we could help with. It'll take years, if not longer, for some of those industries to recover. We need to help people pivot now so that we can move our low and middle income residents. We want to ensure that programs like Linkage are able to continue working for our city residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Samantha Montano.
Hi, folks. Thanks for having me. I'm Samantha Montano. I'm here for Coalition for a Truly Affordable Boston, Boston Tenant Coalition, and Jamaica Plain Neighborhood Development Corporation. So I'd like to outline some asks we have, and I hope that these asks can be seen through a reparational racial equity lens, understanding that, now is not the time to be careful with money, especially when a lot of folks are hurting. So something to consider is the new linkage rate is $15.39 per square foot. And if we wait till after the first 100,000 square feet for commercial space, we're losing out on $1,539,000 in linkage. And buildings are only paying for half of the linkage space, right? Because if a 200,000 square foot building is only getting 100,000 square foot linkage charge, that's a lot of money that we could be bringing in for job training and affordable housing. And then also, we would like to lower the $100,000 square foot trigger to 30,000 square feet. Recognizing that the folks who are going to be working in these commercial spaces are low-income, moderate folks who need as much opportunity to have housing in the city of Boston as possible. Also understanding that housing, affordable housing is not equity building. We aren't providing opportunities for folks who live in those housing units to build equity. So these job training programs are essential, as are the opportunities for folks to live in rental units that they can afford at rates that aren't, charging them more than 30% of their income, so that eventually, hopefully, they can become homeowners in the city of Boston. And then the last request is that, everyone gets a COLA, cost of living adjustment. Linkage should also get a COLA. So we need to make sure that we aren't just having these huge adjustments. I don't know, what is this, once every 10 years or however often it is. We need to have elected officials who are ready to make those small incremental cost of living adjustments so that we're staying at pace with what it costs to develop affordable housing and what it costs to do job training in the city of Boston, understanding that, these are reparational issues, and because, who is this impacting most, right? Black and brown folks. So it's just seeing it through that lens and recognizing that, we need to take these steps, and appreciating that, everyone would love a cost of living adjustment, including legislation. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Just going on and to the administration now. Tim, I don't know if you were going to do any more testimony. You're muted.
Yeah, I know. That's why I had to find the mute button. No, we did. Brian was going to speak a little bit about the IDP because we're clearly going to be talking about that at the other hearing.
Right.
We are done with our testimony for today. So if you want to turn it over to the council, that would be fine. Thank you
so much. Thank you. So we're going to go then through the questions from folks. At this point, I kind of want to, since I filed it, I'm going to go ahead and pop off some questions real quick. And then we'll go in order of arrival and those who are still here. So I am curious specifically about the Nexus study and the $24 recommendation. Is it your interpretation, this is for the BPDA, that the study did conclude that would not have, at that time, pre-pandemic, okay, so I understand that at that time, the $24 linkage fee would not have a huge impact on commercial development? I understood that was the conclusion of the study.
Yeah, so I just want to address that. So there was a range in the study. The range was between 1486 and 24.04. And so Hillary, your statement is absolutely correct. But what I quoted was the housing exaction rate was between 1287 and 2139, and the jobs was 199 to 264 per square foot, and the combined recommendation was between 1486 and 24.04. So the study is available online. That was posted as soon as it was, as soon as way before the 2018 increase as well. So the understanding at that point was this, this was done by Carl Seidman, who's a really, really great resource for a lot of cities, including Boston and Cambridge, on linkage. And he looked at, as Hillary rightly pointed out, he looked at what the funding gap would be to build housing. And so the number was in the 80s, and then what the cities could afford. So at that point, yes, that range was what was recommended. And the range was, like I said, between 1486 and 24.04 for the exaction rates.
Okay. So, but if you were to go to the 24.4 pre-pandemic, there was not, they concluded that those were rates that would not hurt commercial development. Right?
I don't know if we can say that in a...
At that time, pre-pandemic.
So it also found that the impact of new development would require linkage fees well in excess of the then current rates, but it also cautioned that such rates could not be sustained without Boston's office market losing competitiveness to regional and national peers. So that's why there was a range that was presented, and the 24.04 was the high of that range, and it was 1486 to 24.04.
So just for folks' background, we did send a copy of the study to all of the counselors in advance. And so I think what I'm trying to nail down is if we were to go to maybe, so now we're in, well, before I get to the post-pandemic questions, the other, just for background and education, you know, the linkage payments aren't paid in one lump sum. My understanding is they're paid over 7 years.
So that's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. So linkage payments.
Wait. Just could you confirm that that's how it's done? It's in 7 years, right?
So that's what I'm saying. So linkage rates for housing are for over 7 years, and for jobs it's over 2 years.
Okay. So at the time, I mean, I remember having some discussions that there were some developers who were actually behind payment, or there seemed to be no enforcement mechanism if they weren't making their payments on time. Do we have a gap right now? Is everybody up to par on their payments for linkage?
So as far as I know, the linkage payments are collected by the treasurer. And as far as I know, so the linkage payments are collected for housing over 7 years and for jobs over 2 years. And I don't want to put words in Sheila Dillon's mouth, but I do know that this is actually looked at favorably. So we have an income stream for housing. So there's a 7-year stream for housing that comes in, and that's something that that the NHT really likes. And so we can have a dependable stream of money coming in. So the way linkage is collected, and it goes straight to Treasury, and then goes to DND and the Neighborhood Housing Trust, and then NJT for the Jobs Trust. And we allow developers, the developers are allowed to pay it over 7 years, or they can net present value it out. And as far as my knowledge goes, I don't know of any developers who have not paid the linkage payments, because they're obligated to pay those payments. I could be wrong, but as far as I know, I have not heard that linkage payments have not been made by developers.
I guess I would be curious also about what is the enforcement if they're late? You know, do we add interest? Do we, what do we do? Because sometimes the building's done, so they're still paying on what they've already finished, right? So there's no permits to pull back. So what's the enforcement mechanism if they're late? Who's the enforcer?
The Treasury is the enforcer, so we can go back and look at those records to see if there's any right now, but we don't have that information with us at this time.
That's okay. It might be something that's worth looking at then, if there are late payments or if there were people falling behind, what we can do to either step them up or something. That's one thing we could put out there. I do wonder if there's also a balance between the payments over time and possibly getting more money up front at a higher rate, but they don't have to make long-term payment plans. I don't know, but I just think there might be a balance that allows for us to look at different rates based on how fast we get the money as a city, which I would like to further discuss that. I know, thank you, Sonal, for bringing up the fact that we want regular revenue. And I know in the housing trust that I sit, we want regular revenue, but I wonder if we couldn't get higher amounts sooner versus a lower amount that's spread over time. I don't know.
What I can speak to is the housing creation. Housing creation is already a part of the program. That is where, if a developer is making a contribution directly to an affordable housing development, that we get the money all up front. Now, that actually is because of inflation. There is actually a kind of a deflation rate. So they actually pay a smaller amount than all their total payments, but we're getting it all at once. So that's one of the reasons why that has worked for us. We usually do about one of those a year. One of the most recent is a connection between the Hub on Causeway project and a 23-unit elderly building in the North End. Also between Children's Hospital and a project in Mission Hill. So those are kind of a way that we can get money earlier for immediate projects that are usually somewhere near the actual development.
And is it paid at the same rate?
It's there. What it is that they get a slight discount because they're paying for it all up front.
Okay. But creating it immediately affordable housing.
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
All right, I'm gonna turn over.
Add one more thing. Can I just add one more thing? Sorry, and this, I just want to make sure that we talk about DIP agreements. So you talk about enforcement. So developers do sign legal documents. They sign, what's called DIP agreements that memorializes what their linkage obligations are to the city. So those are legal documents that are signed by developers. So those agreements are legal documents, and that is part of the enforcement for linkage.
So before I turn it over, I just wanted to, in general, I guess, get a feel for understanding how the administration is seeing this conversation. You've heard about increases, you've heard about lowering the threshold, and I guess I want to know if there's an appetite to really engage in. I know we just did an increase, but to continue that conversation and to head towards a goal of increasing linkage.
So. As I mentioned, we're committed to future reviews of the linkage program, absolutely committed to it. It's that there's a lot of folks on this call who, I know really, really well. A lot of friends on this call, and we've been working on this for a long time. So we're committed to future reviews of the linkage program, yes. Great.
So, so for the actual language in this ordinance, because we're not gonna get too deep in the weeds, we're gonna go into that in a working session, but I'm excited to hear about your thoughts at that time about the actual language in the ordinance. So I'm going to turn over to Councillor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a couple of questions. In terms of transparency, in Austin Brighton since between 95 and 2015, we had 17.7 million square feet. And the question that I get asked by constituents all the time is, where did the linkage money go? So there is a desire for more transparency around linkage, how much money is generated by these projects and how is it being spent? And I think there's a general desire to follow the money and also to understand how if it is tied to a development impact fee, is the neighborhood that is being directly impacted by the development, how much of that money stays to mitigate the impact of the development in that neighborhood?
That's good. Do we have that report?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. The housing funds are gone through the Neighborhood Housing Trust, which is a appointed body by the mayor. And one city council member, which I believe Councilor, you're still on it. I haven't been to a meeting in a year, so so I'm not sure. They do kind of, keep their own books. And as I think you might realize that when money comes into the pot, while we are here at D&D are very committed to doing projects in neighborhoods where there's a lot of development, there's also needs in neighborhoods where there's not necessarily a lot of development, but there are a lot of very low income families. So the money is intended to be used citywide. Now, in terms of transparency, I personally, as the Deputy Director for Policy Development and Research, am committed to making sure that we put out a report on the neighborhood trust, housing trust funds this year. It hasn't been done in a few years. But I want to make sure that we do that just for that very reason, so that there's some more transparency about where the money is going and to what kind of projects. I think there's a lot of great stories there. And so I'll be happy to make sure that we share that with you and our constituents.
And then in terms of the training, job training, one thing I'm hearing is that, English language skills, that the training is very focused on folks who are improving their English, perhaps, but that it's not catching the folks who are really entry level, no or very little English, and that it's difficult to get funding to do English language classes for those folks who are really coming in at a very low level. The focus is getting jobs, but there's a lot of folks who aren't even getting on the bottom rung of the ladder because there isn't adequate funding for very basic English language skills. So that's something I'd like to raise up as we discuss these things.
Thank you, Councillor Braden, for your comments. We will pass that along to the Office of Workforce Development.
And then the other thought I had, and with regard to vacancies in traditional office spaces, you know, we're seeing increased vacancy as so much of our industry is moving into the biotech sphere. If we end up with a lot of office space that is sort of chronically underused, should we be looking at converting those buildings, or at least some of them, into housing as a way to address our incredible need for more housing that's affordable for the actual workers who live in the city?
Thank you. Thank you for that comment.
Thank you. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And just to, I love thank you for that study, Tim, and your initiative, and already making sure we get that summary of where the Housing Trust money went. But I'm wondering also, could you add where it came from?
Yes, certainly.
Okay. Thank
Madam
you.
Chair, I had just one other question. I turned my page. When a building, if a building is built and the developer signs a memorandum, a contract with the city to pay a certain level of linkage money over a period of time, what happens if the building is sold? Does the new owner have a commitment, a requirement to continue to pay those linkage fees?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Are those linkage fees updated at the point of sale, or are they the old linkage fees?
It's all attached to when the building is approved.
Oh, Madam Chair, may I? If there's an upgrade in the BPD in a PDA, is there any changes in the PDA, like the approval of a PDA is, and then maybe further down the line, the approval is there's an amendments made, or is there a requirement or to change the linkage fees at that point?
That's actually in the ordinance that I filed that we're discussing. Councillor
Very
Baker.
good. Thank you.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So let me just speak to, if it's okay with you, Madam Chair, to Liz a little bit. So through the Jobs Trust, in this past couple of rounds, we've been looking at trying to enhance English learners, but as you know, it's about getting the job. So at the end of the day, we have a you know, the system that's in place. It's about dollars going out and how many jobs we were able to point to with those with that money. I personally think that we should be thinking a little bit differently about the money coming in, the money coming out. I think that we should be trying to you know, build more programming that's doing the job training, maybe actual brick and mortar places where people can stop by, those sorts of things in neighborhoods. And the entrance level people that are just learning English, it's more difficult to maybe get them into that job or job readiness, where people that have a little bit of English, if they get more training in the language, then you're able to more easily show them, you know, direct them towards a job. I hope that helped you a little bit there, Liz. You know, we've just been kind of focusing on language and I've been on for a year. The last two rounds, we've talked quite a bit about language and improving language skills in COVID.
Thank you. We can discuss this offline at another time, but I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Is the vacancy rate, so now is the vacancy rate for January 21, you had it at 9%. Do we have projections of what this year moving forward is going to look like? Like, do we see that coming down, or do we see that getting worse?
Don't know is the best answer. Don't know.
Yeah.
Our BPDA research department tracks these on almost I want to say weekly, if not bi-weekly basis. These are tracked very, very closely. So I'm happy to provide you more information as we get it. And the best answer is we just don't know.
Yeah, and going into this downturn, it's going to be difficult. I think to figure out a lot of those. I think we're going to just have to live it, and hopefully we don't go down too much, and that rate can stay, maybe come down a little bit. I had one more question: institutional development, where they, a lot of times they're pilot institutions. Do they pay in? So if the hospital expands 300,000 in hospital use, that's so will they pay into this, or is that part of the pilot? They don't need to pay in for it, and is it the developer that would have to pay into this?
Yeah. So IMPs are subject to linkage. So institutional development is subject to linkage payments. In fact, institutions usually have a 10-year IMP at the BPDA that goes through a pretty robust community process with a task force, et cetera, before approval. And they get a one exemption per 10-year IMP. And so institutions do pay into linkage fees, absolutely. Yes.
But they do get that first pass. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. I did have one other question. Let me think of it. I can't think of it right now. Thank you, madam. Thank you. Oh, no, I do. I do have somewhat of a concern. We're talking about, we just raised the contribution amount, and we're sitting here talking about how do we raise it more. I think we should be looking at, let's see how this initial increase lands, and let's see what the next year looks like before we start going to the maximum of $24 of what the study said. We want to go right at the maximum. I think we have to be careful doing that, because we are in somewhat of a depression here, and I think we ought to let the economy see what's going to happen this next 6 months to a year, see what the year looks before we start charging full on with going towards maximum payouts. We did just increase this by 40%. So just a thought. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for holding this hearing here today.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. Councilor Mejia.
Good afternoon, everyone. Great to see you all. Thank you, Councilor Edwards, for bringing us together. I just have a few questions. When it comes to the inclusionary development, are we prioritizing building affordable units that on sites, or having them built elsewhere? Just curious around that. And I also just wanted to second Councilor Braden's point around making information around linkage more public, perhaps even considering a dashboard of sorts that we can keep track. And while I'm not anti-development, contrary to what most may believe, I think we need to be incredibly mindful of how we are developing in the city of Boston, who is developing in the city of Boston. And I'm just curious, from a racial equity lens, how are we prioritizing development who, are of color, developers of color, and what type of support we're offering those types of developers, particularly those who actually live in Boston and want to stay in Boston and want to continue to develop in Boston. What does that look like in terms of that conversation, especially for those who have less capital to build with? And I really just want to uplift that. I love Sam's comments around the whole COLA situation. I think that's the right thinking, and would love to see what that looks like in terms of those increases being parallel to the COLA. So thank you for bringing that to the space, Sam. I think that that's the type of thinking that we should all be embracing. And Joe, it's good to see you and everyone else here. So just curious about those questions.
Tim, do you want to take some?
I think that, well, first, I may have to get a little bit of it repeated, but on one of the questions was about inclusionary development policy, which we're not focusing on in this particular hearing, but our preference for some time has been that developers put their units on site And through the new affirmatively furthering fair housing zoning process, that's also greatly encouraged for people to keep their units on site in order to encourage diverse communities and diverse developments. You asked about, hold on one second.
I can tell you, I can help you out, Tim. How about that? You don't
No, it was just that I had a siren in the background. In terms of developers and making sure that we have more developers who are MWBE developers, et cetera, there is the existing, and this is not something I work with daily, but there's the Boston Resident Jobs Policy, which keeps track of the hours in terms of minority women and residents who are working on projects, both funded by the city and large private, market rate projects. And that is something that I think will continue to be a discussion both within the Office of Economic Development and within BPDA and within the Department of Neighborhood Development going forward. I'm sure that will be a lively discussion under an acting mayor and or whoever is the mayor in the future. Yeah. In terms of the Department of Neighborhood Development, we are looking at our RFPs to kind of see more about how we can encourage WMBE developers to play a part in those or to be partners in developments where there's city funding. And you can see some of that has already been taking place in our RFPs and BPDA's RFPs for that matter, for the parcels around Nubian Square. So those are some efforts that are ongoing. I'm not sure if there's anyone else on this call from our team who can say something to that, but I will leave it there.
Tim, I'll just jump in real quick on the issue that Sam Montano and Councilor Mejia brought up about the cost of living.
All right.
So one of the things that the home rule petition did was authorize us to make that automatic annually, because what we saw was that if you have to go and go through all these motions going through the BPDA board and the zoning commission every 3 years, those things get lost in the shuffle. So that became automatic, but we saw the same thing that you guys saw, that it needs to keep pace on an annual basis, and it's right now it's linked to the consumer price index formula.
So yeah, okay. Tim, I wanted to just go quickly back and Councilor Edwards, this is probably something where your expertise can redirect me if I'm going off the train here. You could bring me back to where we need to be because you're really good at that. But I'm just curious, Tim, when we think about equity and we think about creating opportunities for developers of color in particular, it's great that we have the Boston Jobs Residency, but I'm just really pushing on this whole notion that we are looking at some of these projects that get approved or not, and if there's ways for us to lean in a little bit more on supporting low income and developers of color to enter this workforce, right? To enter this as an opportunity. Like, how can we seize this moment to really kind of put some teeth behind like that effort? And so that's kind of where I was kind of hoping to kind of hear a little bit more of a commitment about what that would look like.
Right. And I just, it's just that we don't really have the right person on the call to make that commitment here, but I can say what we've been doing and what we're working on. I mean, we know that there are a number of ways that we can increase participation by people of color in development. It's whether it's that we put out packages of work or of parcels that are smaller, where there's, so there's not as much of a leap to make for those projects. We're doing that with the Neighborhood Homes Initiative, which has been very impactful in bringing in new people into the development space. It's looking at ways to maybe provide technical assistance to these same developers so that they can actually participate in these. There are a number of things, and the recent disparity study that out of that disparity study, there also will be recommendations about ways that we can engage people more and get them more involved. And that will be more overseen, at least in our department, by the Neighborhood Housing Division, which is Jessica Boatwright-Shop, and I just don't have her on the call today because I didn't think we'd be approaching this kind of question today. But thank you.
Thank you.
And we can, yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to occupy any more space before I get the gavel that I'm done. But I just wanted to say, Amy, it was so good to see your kids in the backdrop as a working mom doing remote learning. It's so great to see the kiddos.
I feel you.
Just want to give you a shout out on that. But anyways, Councilor Edwards, I'm going to stop asking questions for now. And thank you so much. If I have any more, I'll just follow up if there's an opportunity to do so.
Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Flaherty and Councilor Bach.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I just want to thank all the panelists for their participation, but also for the great work that they're doing and they continue to do throughout the pandemic. And I just have a more or less a general question. And in the linkage bill, it says that the zoning commission may require increased exactions for any development project that seeks relief through the filing of an NPC or amendment PDA. However, the current language in this proposed text amendment says that the BRA shall require project seeking PDA amendment to contribute at the rate of affordable housing and job exaction currently effective in the year proposed amendment. So I guess I just wanted some clarification on that. Is there a difference between the linkage bill that was passed and what that's doing compared to what the zoning text amendment to the zoning amendment is seeking to do here?
Yes. So I'm the scrivener. The point is that yes, linkage fees do apply at the point of, they negotiate that, Councilor Flaherty, as you are well aware, at the PDA beginning, and they make sure that the linkage fees are settled. What we're saying is, as PDAs get amended, that at that point of the amendment is when if there's a new linkage fee, that going forward, that the amended project must use the new linkage fee. So that's it. I'll give you an example. What we're trying to do is, like, based off of Suffolk Downs, right? It's going to take 20 years for it to be built. And we didn't want 20 years from now to be using linkage fees from 2021 or 20. We wanted to be using linkage fees in 2040. And we believe the way to connect that is through the amendment process. What is also being proposed, Councilor Flaherty, from our advocates is actually not to have it connected to amendment process, but just when the building gets built and when the final building permit is pulled. But I guess there's a goal for us to say it shouldn't be negotiated all up front at the beginning. That as the project grows and moves and expands and makes more money, so should linkage.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair. Unless anyone else had anything to add, I just saw the difference between may and shall, and I just want to make sure that I get clarity on that. So I don't have any other questions. Appreciate you hosting, Madam Chair, and look forward to listening to the panelists concluding the hearing.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Bach.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to everyone, all the advocates and the administration. I'm so excited. I was excited at 3 a.m. When this got passed, and I'm excited. And I was excited when the administration went ahead and made that initial move, and excited for us to keep kind of thinking about how to grow the linkage program in support of these critical issues for the city. I think it's something that has really worked since we did it in the 80s, and we just have to look for opportunities to scale it up. So I guess my questions. So one thing, Brian, I wanted to circle back on. Are you saying that indexing is already built in to what just went through?
Yeah, that was one of the provisions of the home rule, was that we could essentially automate that, so it happens automatically. We don't have to go. In the past, what we would have to do is, we were authorized to every 3 years go to the BRA board, get them to authorize us to recommend a change that would then have to be adopted by the zoning commission. So it was sort of an overt act that we had to do to make this all happen. And we know that there were times over the last 30 years, 30 plus years, where that didn't happen. We missed a window because it's every 3 years and you've got to hit that window. If you miss it, then you got to wait. And now it's automatic rather than one big jump every 3 years, small incremental jumps every year, but it happens automatically. So we can build it into the formula. We don't need to do anything other than just change the number.
Right, but what I'm asking is, when I know that the home rule gave us the authority to do that and that we can do that. What I'm asking is, what have we actually done, and what would we need to do that as automatically as possible?
Yeah, so I think I can't remember. I think the date is every July 1st, beginning of fiscal year. So July 1st, you look back over the past year, see what the CPI was adjusted, because it's not just CPI, it's CPI U and W, and there's the formula for that.
It's referred to in Councillor Edwards' thing as the combined index, right?
Yeah, and that's what it's listed in the zoning. So you look back and see what was the combined index for the last year and adjust the rate by that, and it would just happen automatically. You don't need the BRA board or the zoning commission to do it. It just gets done.
Right.
And that was the.
But to be clear, you do need language like what Councillor Edwards has put in her ordinance, right? Like in order we now have the right to do this, but we haven't actually done it yet, and we would need like what.
Oh, I see what you're getting at is, do we need to change the zoning in order to be actually able to do that? I don't think so. It's the zoning would be inconsistent, I guess, if we don't. So to that extent, yeah, we might need to adjust change the zoning to include that.
But I think Councillor Edwards' language, and I know we might be skirting, Madam Chair, close to working session territory, so it's fine if we. I did want to highlight that the indexing concept is, I think, a core part of the legislation before us, and I guess my question is, do we I think the idea of Councillor Edwards' proposal is to basically make it, as sort of you're saying, super automatic, so that we're not necessarily even having a kind of should we, shouldn't we conversation every year, right? But it's just saying oh, the BPDA every year, this is going to happen. How just walk me through mechanically then, if we didn't pass this, is that going to happen? And if we do pass this, is it still gonna take a motion to the board and then the zoning commission? I'm just trying to think about logistically how to streamline it as possible.
Yeah, so I think the way the enabling legislation home rule was intended to make that automatic, so that we need do nothing. It just happens automatically. But I think I think your point that there remains sort of an inconsistency between that and what the current zoning says. So we may need to change that part of the zoning. I think somebody told me it's in section 14 of the bill goes into detail about what that is. But to your point, it will happen automatically, and it's based on that combined index. I think the bill also allows us to add in other factors in the combined index, and I think Councilor Edwards' proposal does bring in other factors, and that I think that's something we're looking at. We would need to change the definition of the combined index, I think, but that that's sort of a technical fix.
Right. And I guess I would just say, and this will be a conversation for the working session, I'm certainly in the camp of wanting us to work collectively and to use Councilor Edwards' legislation as a vehicle to make sure that we're using that, that potential authority we now have to do this automatically as clearly as possible, to make it as little of a kind of annual political thing and more of a kind of, oh, this is what happens. And also, as we always hear from the development community, they like predictability. And I think we want predictability on this, right?
100% agree on that. That's what we want too. It's one less thing that you have to worry about and wonder, am I going to forget it or miss it? Because this every 3 years thing, is not very workable, and it creates a much bigger jump than if you did it annually. So that's it smooths out the bumps in the road.
Right, absolutely. And then does the authority or D&D or anyone have opinions on this question of lowering the threshold from 100,000. I mean, certainly and of course there's two aspects to that, right? It's both lowering the threshold of what projects it kicks in for. And then there's the question about whether the exaction applies below the threshold. I think that Sam referenced that, right? So that if it's a 200,000 square foot building, it then applies below. My understanding is that it might actually be easier to do the first than the second, because if you do the second, then if we set the threshold to 30 and then we also required you to pay the whole amount, then like it might seem unfair for somebody who builds like a 29 and doesn't get any. So I know there's some issues around that, but I wondered if Brian or anybody could speak to, or Sanal, maybe this is actually a question for you, kind of whether the authority has considered this question of lowering the threshold. I'm not sure that it was a focus of the Nexus study, et cetera, and sort of what the openness to that is.
So it's my understanding that we have the authority to change both the threshold and the square footage that we would count toward at what point we would start applying it. So whether it's a 50,000 square foot building and we start at 50,000, or we start, we do all the square footage. I think those are both up for discussion. I think that what we would want to take into account is looking at data on what kinds of projects actually are those smaller projects, and seeing whether they're actually becoming, if we want to encourage smaller development over larger development, we may not want to do it on smaller, we may want to set our trigger based around that notion. I'm not sure what that is. Also, it's significantly easier for the BPDA to do enforcement on anything that is considered a large project. So that is at 50,000 square feet. So maybe 50,000 square feet would be a place where we would want to start. So those are considerations, but it is my understanding that we would have the control to be able to set, is it all a square footage? Is it a starting at a particular square footage? And is it only projects starting at this particular square footage as well?
Great. Yeah, my instinct also would be that at a minimum, our large projects, reviews where we're doing all of the kind of board memo, DAP stuff anyways, it would make a lot of sense. And then I'll also just say that I am also supportive of raising the amount. So just for the advocates out there, I think we could, I think obviously we have to, in this moment, let like the economy settle out, and there's a lot of rebuilding that we have to do. But I definitely agree with Amy's point that it's not like in this moment of COVID, we can wait 5 years and then worry about affordable housing and job training. It's like, these are critical things now. So I really appreciate the move the administration made, but I'm definitely open to us talking about more. And then my last question is just on this question about timing and the sort of moment at which it's applicable. And I wondered, somebody said it was based on approvals, but then I thought that the cutoff for the new rate is based on whether people had their PNFs filed prior to February 18th. I thought I might have heard that. So just if you could get some clarity, is it PNF filing date? Is it board approval date? Is it board approval date normally, but PNF in terms of this cutoff with the action? Like, just if you could clarify that. And then any comments from the authority on that. I mean, to me, it seems like, I know again that there are folks who would say, well, we want to lock in and know how much it is, but I would say that, quite frequently, our development community gets their approvals and then waits for the optimal moment in the business cycle to pursue them. And obviously lots of things change in that, including profitability and availability of capital. And it seems to me that assuming that linkage is shifting in a considered way that reflects, the policy studies that the agency and others are doing, it wouldn't be crazy for that to be part of the market sort of conditions that you're considering as you start to build with some guardrails around it. So that's just my thought on it, but I would love to hear about that, and then just some clarity on the PNF versus approvals versus building permit kind of thing.
I'm going to ask Brian to kind of try to tackle that one. I may have said approval earlier, but I think you're right. It's at the time that they file for their approvals. Oh, and Sonal just came back on. I think she can speak to this a lot.
I'm sorry. I have another pre-scheduled commitment at this time, so I'm on and also off. So I do apologize that I'm not able to be on the whole time. But so the linkage increase will apply to any project that files a PNF after February 18th. So that means that any project that will file a PNF after February 18th, starts the Article 80 process, will be subject to the higher linkage rate, which is $15.39 a square foot. And the legislation accounted for, if you're already in the review process, this does not apply to you. So if you're already in the review process, I mean, you've got the 1081, and anyone filing after February 18th, which is the day that we advertise for the zoning commission, that's when the higher linkage rate kicks in for any developer starting their Article 80 process, which is the PNF. So for example, we didn't want to do letter of intent. We were very careful about this. So, we wanted to be sure that, for example, when we did IDP, we said, if you file a letter of intent, you'd be subject to the older IDP. And we didn't get as many kind of letter of intents as we were contemplating or we were afraid of, to be quite honest. But learning the lesson from there, we actually said PNF. So we didn't think that we were trying to make sure that we wouldn't have a slew of letter of intents between the February 11th board meeting and the zoning commission even. And so what we have in place, and it's in the board memo, is that it's the higher linkage rate applies to anyone filing a PNF, and the probability of someone submitting a PNF in that time period, yes, of course it exists, but I don't believe we got a PNF in that time period. So we captured anyone, yeah.
But right now, this point about sort of right now our existing regs and linkage it's more that they're silent. Is that fair on like any capacity for your linkage number to get revised upward later, or it's like it says that your linkage number is basically locked in? So I understand the PNF thing relates to this update, right? But then now that we're in this world, if I have a board memo that goes in now and then 6 months from now we updated linkage again, like is it always, right now it's always going to be tied to the prior board memo? Is that accurate? Or because what we're trying to think about is a situation where somebody gets their board memo and then sits on a project for 10 years and then goes to pull their permits, and the whole linkage world has changed. And is there an opportunity for us to kind of say, hey, you got to pay linkage where we are now?
Oh, you mean board approval? Sorry, I'm just trying to. Okay, so sorry.
Sorry.
No,
I'm not BPDA lingo appropriately.
No, absolutely. No, I understand what you're saying. So yes, so we, I think it's silent, and Ryan, please correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, your point is really well taken, which is locking in linkage rates, basically locking in linkage rates, and basically saying that if you approve a project gets board approval at a certain time, and then signs a DIP agreement, because they have to sign a DIP agreement for the linkage rates to be locked in. So that DIP agreement for the project is what governs the linkage payments. And so if a project doesn't get built for a while after the DIP agreement is signed, what happens then? Is that your question?
Exactly. And what's the latitude for us to adapt that? And it sounds like maybe it's a question of provisions in a DIP agreement, but maybe it's, I think, a legislative fix, which is, I think, what Councilor Edwards is proposing, where basically we create some space for us to say with these projects that are way delayed, like, oh, you have to operate under the current regime.
Yeah, and I think someone raised a point earlier about the amount of value. I'm sorry, I think it was Hillary, and your dog is adorable, Hillary. About the amount of value created if a developer does resell their project, or even value created for a building. So how do you capture that value over time? And it goes to predictability as well. So I think there's a room for conversation there. Absolutely. Yeah.
So just to make sure that for folks who are playing along at home, there are a couple of different scenarios that will come into play. The simplest one to think about is a large project review, and that not part of a plan development area, not part of a PDA master plan, but just simply a straightforward large project review. That DIP rate gets locked in at the filing of the PNF. And then I think one of your questions was, what happens if they sit on that and they come back with a notice of project change later? And you cited a section that allows the BPDA board to consider adjusting the DIP rate based on a notice of project change. And I think that's the question, there is always going to be, is the notice of project change, is there a significant change in the value of the project that would necessitate or indicate that a need to re-examine the DIP rate? And so that's one scenario. Another scenario is the PDA, or Plan Development Area, where the linkage rate gets locked in with the Plan Development Area Agreement itself, and that can, again, that's something that could potentially have be readjusted down the road if they sat on that project. And then the third scenario is the PDA Master Plan, where you're anticipating a project that gets built out in a series of phases over 10, 20, 30 years. And again, each one of those is that's when the linkage rate gets determined by project. It may be locked in. It is possible to lock it in the PDA master plan, but generally, like the last couple of PDA master plans, and there haven't been many, do lock in a rate for a certain period of years, but after 10 years, when new projects come along, it gets recalculated at the current rate. So there are a couple of different levels that this plays out on, but there's sort of a theory behind each one of those. I hope that was clarifying and not more confusing.
No, that was very helpful, Brian. And I think, yes.
So we do have public testimony.
Okay, sorry.
So I'm gonna, if it's okay,
yeah, not a question, just a, I was just gonna say that was helpful. I think that the thing I'm interested in is whether we could make that revision with a notice of project change more automatic and almost like what we've been writing into some of the PDAs, and probably I think also automatic on the PDA side, which I think is part of what Councilor Edwards is trying to get at. So that sounds like topic for further conversation. Thank you, BPDA and Madam Chair. And also I should thank Sanal for having appeared from my district in her background. So anyways, thank you.
Thank you. So we do have some public testimony or folks who are in attendance. And what I'm going to do is just go ahead and call out your name. If you would like to testify, I believe Karen Chen from CPA Boston might still be on. And then I see Charles Glick, he might just be here for questions or just listening. And then I'll go further down the list after those two. And I see we have Markeisha as well. So feel free. Karen, are you there? Karen? Or CPA Boston? I saw you just leave the waiting room, so someone got admitted. Can everyone hear me? You're very insecure sometimes.
Yeah, we hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay. All right. I don't know what happened with CPA. They're in. All right. We're gonna go ahead and keep going on.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Thank you, all the councilors. Karen Chen with the Chinese Progressive Association. We have over 2,000 members, and many of our members are in need of affordable housing and job training. I don't need to reiterate, the importance of affordable housing and job training, in the past and actually in the next period. And CPA want to, support what some of the advocates have said before. We think that the linkage rate should be at least $24. The city should lower the threshold and then I think that the payment should be based on when the building is built, not when the permit was sought, because you can have a permit and then wait years until it's built. And I think that real estate value, I think we, continue to rise, but we're not seeing the same thing with everyday people. And I think someone mentioned before, unemployment is really high, and it doesn't even capture all the people, because the people who are unemployed before the pandemic, they're not even within the system. So we know that from our own, from data, from our everyday experiences, is that a lot of people in need of affordable housing and in need of jobs. And, based on the National Low Income Housing Study in 2020, if you want to live in Boston, to rent a 2-bedroom apartment, you have to make $35.53 to afford it. And for most of our members who are in, only making minimum wage when it was $12.75, that means that you have to work 111 hours a week, to afford to live here. And so we need to do both, affordable housing and job training. And CPA has been involved, in actually several economic downturn, when government workers were, government industry was declining in the 80s. And then more recently, around 2000, when the electronic manufacturing industry was declining. And we recognized that in order for people to be fully employed and gainfully employed, we need to look into, how to make sure the lower English level folks can get job training and then sufficiently trained, and then also move on to vocational training. And we see that this need in this next period for recovery is going to be needed. And we need to have sufficient funding in order to make these programs successful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. I had Charles Flick as well, and sure. May just be here for questions. Let me see. Marquisha?
Yes, hi. Hello.
Hi.
Thank you, Councilor Edward. I want to testify. I had a few thoughts. I want to piggyback on Sam and Karen, part of the on a coalition thing, that we do need more, like the threshold needs to be higher, and it needs to be higher at a lower, I see a lot of, I live in Dorchester. I'm a Dorchester native. I raised my children in Dorchester. And I see a lot of development happening in Dorchester that's having a negative impact on the community. I wanted to, three things really, but one of them is I want people to realize that these developments are going on based on projections of income based on AMIs that are already too high for the area where they're developing at. So that is a big problem in pushing people out and not having people being able to remain where they are. But I see a lot of, I heard Mr. Baker talking about that there are there's a recession and we need to be mindful of people coming out of a recession. I just want people to think about that. It's never really a recession for people for people who have the money to build these projects. It's a recession for the people who need housing. It's a recession for the people who are being displaced because of these buildings. But it's not a recession for people who have the money to build these projects. They're never going to be without money. And to say that to raise this to $24 is too much for them is an affront to the people that are affected by this. Number two, I heard someone quote that the vacancies in these buildings are at 9%. Is that, I want to know, are y'all taking into account like people who, like corporations or billionaires who are renting out apartments but not using them, saving them for when they want to send people across. Because I live in Dorchester, I see these buildings, I see no one in them, and because so are they being rented and just being held over there, and no one is able to use them, and they can't become affordable? People sitting on them, these properties, until they can make them, it's over, and then they can make them exorbitant fees. Like there's no way that there's only 9% of these projects in this area that are not being filled. I walk past them, I see them every day. So what is happening with them if no one's living there, but they're still being rented? How is that helping my community? So I want people to really think about like what these buildings are being built on. Like what is the existing AMI in Boston, which all of this goes down to linkage. It's all connected. The existing AMI is already too much for people who live here. Like I don't live in these outlying places where I make this exorbitant amount of money. Nobody I know does, but we are included in those AMIs are included in our area. And then when you come in and the linkage fee is low, and they don't have to pay linkage unless they build this amount, then we are losing out. So it's not about saving billionaires' pockets. It's about saving our communities. They not going through a recession. We are. And those are the points that I wanted to make. So thank you guys for letting me talk. And I'm sorry, but I get really passionate about these things.
No, passion is beautiful. And I appreciate the questions specifically around the vacancy. I think it was Sanal in the BPDA who brought up the vacancy rate. So while she's answering that quick question, or we'll see if we can get your question answered about that, I wanted to just note who else is going to speak. Michael, you raised your hand. Are you on Charles Glick's channel? Does anyone know what happened to Charles?
I signed up to testify. I don't know what happened.
Okay, so I think you and Pam, is Pam Coker? We'll bring her over as well. Pam from the Municipal Research Bureau. And I'm not sure if Kate Worrell is also here for public testimony, but we can bring her over as well. So actually, let's just let the public go before the BPDA responds, just to make sure we get everyone through. If it's okay, Michael, if you could be brief, then Pam, and then Kate, if she has testimony.
Okay, thank you, Councilor. Thank you for holding this hearing, and congratulations to the council and the city for getting this home rule petition passed and for considering an ordinance to implement it. The mayor gets credit for raising the fees. The organization I'm here representing is the Mass Alliance of HUD Tenants. We've been around since 1983, representing low-income tenants that are fighting to save their homes. But the original idea for linkage came out of the struggle around Copley Place, where advocates proposed a payment to offset the indirect displacement, which was measured in the Copley Place environmental impact statement. Now that the BPDA is going to be evaluating fair housing impacts that would include presumably indirect displacement, we have an opportunity to really institutionalize this. I remember when Mayor Flynn doubled the linkage fee in 1986, we heard all these arguments, oh, it's going to discourage new development. Well, look around, it didn't exactly happen that way. We strongly believe that you could charge a lot more and it's not going to discourage development in this overheated market. So we're part of the CTAP coalition. We support the $24 and lowering the threshold. But this hearing has unveiled one loophole in the whole process, which is what happens when a development is approved, they pay their linkage fee over 7 years, and then they resell it. And the example I'll give is 101 Seaport, which was built for $150 million. I don't know what the linkage, it would have been a linkage payment based on square footage in 2013. They turned around and sold it. The Swedish company sold it 2 years later for $450 million. So they took a $300 million windfall profit. The city didn't get a penny of that. So if there's a way that the formula can be, or the ordinance can implement this so that if a property is resold, that there is a reassessment of linkage. Now, the square footage already is, that's been built because it's on square footage basis. So there would have to be a way to assess based on value, an increment of value. But that's something that I don't know if the ordinance now does that or not, but that's something that I think should be considered. And a similar idea would be recapture agreements when something is built, so that if there is a windfall profit of that sort, the city gets a percentage of that windfall profit. That's a common practice in Europe and Latin America and Canada. It's not done in the United States, but it really should be. So I don't know if that can be worked into this review as well. But we strongly support raising the rate. They can take it. It's not going to discourage development.
Thank you so much, Michael. It sounds like you're talking about a transfer fee.
That too.
Which we all supported in the city council.
Right.
But thank you so much. And that is worth, again, a topic we can bring up at the working session about language that kind of does that, if it's possible to do so.
Thank you.
Pam Coker, from the Research Municipal Bureau. If Pam is not here with us anymore, then Kate, Pam?
Yes, good afternoon.
Oh, okay. Please go ahead.
Sure. Looks like my video is not working at the moment, so I'll just give my remarks quickly. Good afternoon. My name is Pam Coker. I'm the president of the Boston Municipal Research Bureau. I'm also a city resident. Chair Edwards, Vice Chair Flaherty, and members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to speak to Docket 0239. I appreciate the remarks in particular by Sonal Gandhi from the BPDA about balancing public policy goals, and that is my message today. The importance of balancing the demand for increased linkage fees to support housing and job training with the impact of linkage fees on development project viability, so that the Boston community can continue to benefit from the benefit of the linkage fees supporting housing and also job training. So the Boston community can continue to do what it needs to do for its residents in terms of housing and job training. During this hearing, we've heard remarks from Brian Glasscock, we've heard remarks from Tim Davis and Councillor Bach and a number of others, wanting to talk about not only the increases that can happen automatically to this program, but implementation of the linkage rate, the timing and when those the linkage fees are leveraged on particular projects. And also I want to recognize and appreciate Councillor Edwards' comment much earlier in the hearing about, I believe it was an intention for additional conversation around a clear process for considering leakage updates. So I certainly look forward to some additional robust conversation about creating a clear process for how to consider linkage updates going forward, such as the timing of updates and additional other factors beyond the combined CPI. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to more conversation on this issue.
Thank you. I think it was Kate Worrell. If I mispronounced your last name.
Kate's not planning to testify. She's just in the gallery.
Okay, excellent. I think we've made it through all of public testimony, and I think it's 2021. I'm trying to get back on my rhythm of 2-hour hearings. So we have about 8 minutes left. I'm really trying to do that. And so I do know that there was one question about the vacancy rate of 9% from 6 to 9%. And after that question is answered, or at least discussed, if we could, counselors, if you have any concluding remarks, I'm going to go through a round, and then we're going to conclude. So could someone discuss Marisha's, excuse me, question about the vacancy rate?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. Is it Markeisha?
Markeisha, yes.
Markeisha, thank you so much for your comments, Markeisha. It's really great to hear from folks like you, and I agree, passion is always appreciated, and I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing your experiences and your story. So a little bit of kind of background on the vacancy rates that I talked about. So the BPD Research Department tracks our office vacancy rates. Actually, they track a lot of stats across the city. And so we've been looking at vacancy rates for many different sectors across the city, since 2019, but definitely much more closely through the pandemic, making sure that we can recover in a way that's meaningful and impactful. So the daily vacancy rate for offices, and this is for downtown offices, is usually around between 6% in 2019, and it went up to 9%. So we're looking at, we really are tracking the vacancy rates for offices, and like I said, it's mostly for downtown locations. And then we also track vacancy rates for housing and retail. So I'm happy to send you any information, Markeisha, that you'd like to get, you'd like to get from us. But that's a very kind of big picture overview of the vacancy rates I talked about.
Thank you very much. So I don't. So you guys are you don't have the information right now for vacancy rates for housing, like on you right now. You would have to send that to me. You don't have any information on that?
So let me see, hang on. So on the housing, I'm happy to send you any information you like. If you want to send me an email, Markeisha, I'll put my email address here. Just send me an email and I'm happy to send you anything you'd like.
Thank you.
And just to let you know, Markeisha, we are actually having, we're not stopping this conversation. So you'll be invited if you'd like to come back to the working session so we can go on and further. And by then, either you can wait till then and get the information, or write Sanal and get it directly right now. But these questions are reserved for continued conversation, and there will be answers at the working session.
Okay, thank you.
Just want to make sure.
So Edward, can I share my email? I don't think I can. So Markeisha, so is there a chat function here?
I think we disabled it on these. But you can email the committee if you'd like, Markeisha, ccc.go.
And also Markeisha
at boston.gov.
And also Markeisha, if you look on the screen, you can see Sanal Gandhi has her name there. It's her name, sanal.gandhi@boston.gov.
Okay, thank you very much.
That spelling you see on the screen, and that's how you would send it.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
So we are going to just do some concluding remarks. I think of the counselors left, we'll start with Counselor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all the panelists and all the folks who came in to testify. I look forward to continuing this conversation in a working session, and thank you all. I have no further questions.
Thank you. I think Counselor Baker may have gone. So Counselor Mejia.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Counselor Edwards. And it's always great to have Counselor Bach up in here because she has a lot of great follow-up questions. So thank you for, again, yet another tutorial on all things. So really do appreciate you, Counselor Bach, as well. And Markeisha, yes, to all those questions that you asked, okay? Because if we're not really serious about this whole idea of this recession, who is standing to benefit from the backs of our people, right? So everybody should be, all things should be impacted, not one group over the other. So I really do appreciate that insight that you brought to the conversation. And Hillary, earlier today, you were also pushing us to really kind of be more aggressive around this conversation. So I just wanted to just give a shout out to Maha for your steadfast conviction, specifically around the things that are happening in Dorchester. UMass Boston is a great example of what happens when we're not hyper vigilant. So thank you for that. And Amy too, you know, it's just great. And the administration and everybody else, but you know, and Councilor Edwards, I always love coming to all of the things that you host because it's always a tutorial for all of us. So thank you for always helping people understand the mechanics of it all. So thank you for your leadership in the space. And that's all. Thank you all.
Thank you, Councilor. I think we have Councilor Bach next. I think Councilor Flaherty may have gone. Yeah, Councilor Bach.
Great. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Just want to thank everyone again. I'm excited for the working session and following up on these various fronts. I think it's the threshold, the indexing question, and how to make that as automatic as possible. Obviously the question of sort of the point of trigger and how to maybe set some more automatic readjustments when people wait a long time. Appreciated Karen's testimony on that too. And then this question of amount, which, you know, maybe that's not in this legislation, but I think it's actively on the table for all of us in the not too distant future. So thank you for creating the context in which to have this conversation, and I'm looking forward to it going on. This is such an important thing for our city.
So I'll just quickly conclude all of those things that you were going to say, that you just listed. Kenzie is going to say in concluding remarks. I'll just add to that. We have also the study. We wanted to make sure there was a time frame, beginning, middle, and end, so that the study isn't the end. Councilor Flynn, I didn't know if you wanted to say any concluding remarks, but I'm just concluding the hearing. But we have the study. We also have the question of resale, and if there's a windfall, if there's any way to link linkage payments to that. But other than that, I think I just want to remind folks, a lot of people were very much interested in the IDP, which is that 13% at the AMI. Markeisha brought it up, Councilor Mejia brought it up, Councilor Braden brought it up, and we can bring it all up again on March 30th, because that's when we're going to have the hearing specifically on IDP, because that percentage and that AMI does need to change. I don't think anyone doubts that. And so we have that. And then I just wanted to remind folks to thank folks again for participating, for coming here today. Councilor Flynn, we're just ending. I don't know if you wanted to say your thank yous, and then we will conclude.
Just want to say thank you to you, Councilor Edwards, to the panelists, the city administration staff for tremendous work on this issue. Thank you, Councilor Edwards.
All right, it's 2:01. So I'm at my 2-hour limit. So everyone, thank you so much. And we will notify the working session and continue conversation. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.